The Zorkesh were the undisputed masters of the galaxy. Their warships gleamed in the cold of space, their technologies so advanced that no one dared challenge them for centuries. They had crushed any force that stood in their way. But now something different was happening. A ragged fleet of human ships entered their territory, battered, worn, and covered in rust. They were an oddity among the sleek alien ships that surrounded them, their hulls peeling, and the engines sputtering in ways that made even the bravest alien warriors smirk at their arrival. No one believed these humans would amount to anything. Their ships were relics, their weapons old and primitive. The Zorkesh laughed at them, a pitiful display of arrogance and superiority. It was a joke to them, but the humans didn't see it that way. They had come to prove a point. Captain Alia Carter stood on the bridge of the HFY Vanguard, staring at the alien ships through the viewport. They were massive and overwhelming. But she wasn't afraid. She had seen worse. The Vanguard was old, sure, it was a relic from another time. But it had heart. It had something no one in the galaxy expected from humans. They had a fire in their veins that refused to die, even in the face of certain destruction. They had a drive to survive that could not be matched by any of the so-called superior races of the galaxy. The Zorkesh underestimated them, and that would be their downfall. Alia had spent years training for this moment. She wasn't just leading a crew. She was leading a mission to prove that humanity had more to offer than what met the eye. She looked down at the worn controls of the ship, the once pristine dashboard now showing signs of age. But it still worked, it still powered on. And for the first time in a long while, she felt something she hadn't in a while: hope. The crew was ready. They knew what they were facing, but no one knew what the Vanguard was truly capable of. The Zorkesh fleet had no idea that the Vanguard was carrying something that could turn the tide of the battle. They had laughed at humanity's old tech, but the humans were hiding a secret, something that would leave the Zorkesh reeling, a weapon that could shake the foundation of the galaxy to its core. And no one could have guessed where it was hidden. It wasn't in the sleek hull of the ship or in the advanced systems they had created. It was something far simpler, buried beneath layers of forgotten blueprints and half-built schematics, a quantum cannon far beyond anything the Zorkesh had encountered before. As the Vanguard moved deeper into the heart of Zorkesh territory, Alia could feel the tension build around her. The crew knew this was their only chance. There would be no retreat, no second chances. Once they committed to this fight, there was no turning back. The Zorkesh had already begun to take notice of the humans and their rusted ships. They were too far out to ignore now, and their commanders had begun their mocking transmissions, taunting the humans for their perceived weakness. They called them outdated and slow. They thought their ships were nothing more than space junk. But Alia couldn't help but smile. There was a quiet confidence building inside her, because she knew the truth. The Zorkesh had no idea what they were up against, and they were about to find out just how deadly humanity could be. Alia Carter stood at the helm of the HFY Vanguard, her fingers dancing across the worn but reliable controls of the ship, her gaze locked on the massive alien fleet ahead. Their sleek ships hovered in space like sharks circling their prey. The Zorkesh had no idea how outmatched they were. The Vanguard wasn't just an old ship. It was a symbol of humanity's strength. It was a symbol of survival and determination, a testament to everything humanity had been through to get this far. The crew was ready. They stood in the shadows of the bridge, their faces etched with focus, their hands steady as they awaited their orders. Alia knew they weren't afraid. The humans had been underestimated. Since the beginning of their rise from the ashes of war on Earth, they had fought against impossible odds and had come out victorious again. And again, they weren't going to lose now, not when victory was within their grasp, not when they had come this far. The Zorkesh fleet began to move into position, their commanders barking orders to one another as they lined up their ships like a wall of steel around the Vanguard. Alia's heart raced, but she kept her expression calm, her mind focused. She wasn't worried. The Vanguard was carrying a weapon that would make the Zorkesh fleet realize just how foolish they had been to underestimate humanity. She glanced at the tactical console. The readouts were blinking green. Everything was in place. "Captain, the Zorkesh are initiating their approach," said Lieutenant Harris from the communications station, his voice steady but laced with tension. Alia nodded. She had expected this. The Zorkesh would move in close. They believed their overwhelming numbers would crush the Vanguard's old hull. but they didn't know what the Vanguard had hidden inside its rusty frame. "Prepare the quantum cannon," Elia ordered, her voice unwavering. The crew moved quickly as the ship's massive weapon powered up. The hum of energy vibrated through the hull of the Vanguard, a sound that made everyone on board hold their breath. It was a feeling like no other, the moment before battle, the moment before everything changed forever. The Zorkesh fleet continued to close in. Their weapons were charged and ready, their ships bristling with advanced tech and weaponry. They didn't know it yet, but they were walking straight into a trap. They had been lured in by their own arrogance. They thought the humans were weak, but in truth, the humans had always fought with one hand tied behind their back. This time, they weren't holding anything back. Alia watched as the first Zorkesh ship came into range. She could feel the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. The future of humanity rested on this moment. She had no doubts that the quantum cannon would work. She had no doubts that it would destroy whatever came in its path. But she did feel something else, a strange sense of justice. For all the years of being dismissed, for all the times humanity had been laughed at for their old tech, their patched-up ships, this was the moment that would finally show the galaxy their true strength. "Firing quantum cannon on my mark," Alia said, her voice calm, but filled with anticipation. The crew fell silent as the moment stretched out. The Zorkesh were too close now, their ships surrounding the Vanguard with only moments left. "Mark," Alia said as she slammed her hand down on the activation console. A blinding flash of light erupted from the Vanguard's cannon. The energy surged through the ship's frame, a violent blast of raw power that tore through the nearest Zorkesh warship. Like paper, the alien vessel disintegrated in the blink of an eye. The crew watched in awe as the impossible became reality. The shockwave from the quantum cannon's blast reverberated through the Vanguard's hull as the last remnants of the Zorkesh warship were scattered across space like ash in the wind. The crew stared in stunned silence at the empty void where the enemy ship had once been. Nothing remained, not even debris. The blast had been too powerful. Even the advanced Zorkesh shields had been no match for the sheer force of the weapon. Alia's hand still rested on the activation console, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and triumph. The first strike had been a success. She'd known it would be, but seeing it with her own eyes made her realize just how much had changed, how much was at stake now. The Zorkesh had been unchallenged for centuries, and they had never seen anything like this before. "Status report," Alia commanded, her voice calm though her heart raced. "Shields holding steady, Captain. No damage to the Vanguard." Lieutenant Harris replied quickly, his eyes darting over the readouts. The hum of the ship's systems echoed around the bridge, a quiet testament to the ship's strength despite its age. "Enemies closing in on our position," reported Ensign Ravis from the navigation station, her eyes glued to the viewport as the Zorkesh warships shifted into formation. The remaining fleet had regrouped, and now they were coming in with renewed determination. The loss of their flagship had thrown them into a frenzy. They were no longer laughing. "Good," Alia muttered to herself. She turned to the crew. "They're angry now. Let's make sure they stay that way." The Zorkesh ships fired their first round of missiles toward the Vanguard. With precision, the missiles glided through space like a swarm of wasps, their warheads gleaming with deadly intent. The crew braced themselves for impact. The missiles were fast and powerful, but Alia had known this was coming. "Deploy countermeasures," she ordered sharply. The Vanguard's defensive systems sprang into action as the old warship released a series of decoy flares and electronic jammers into the void. The Zorkesh missiles locked onto the decoys and veered off course. The ship's shields flared as the remaining missiles were absorbed harmlessly into the energy barrier. Alia could feel the pulse of the defense systems through the floorboards of the bridge. The ship was holding together. "Enemy ships closing at full speed," Ensign Ravis announced, her voice tight with concentration. "Time to show them what a rusty hull can really do," Alia said, her voice low with purpose. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers." The Vanguard lurched as Alia slammed her hands down on the controls. The ship twisted and turned as it dodged incoming fire. The Zorkesh fleet tried to pin them down, but the Vanguard's agility was something they hadn't accounted for. The old ship weaved through the hail of missiles and laser fire with surprising grace for its size. The crew worked in perfect synchronization as the ship danced through space like a living thing. "Quantum cannon at full charge," Captain Lieutenant Harris called out as he monitored the power levels. Alia smiled grimly. "Get ready to fire again." The Zorkesh fleet was relentless, but so were the humans. The Vanguard was old, yes, but it was not helpless. It was a reflection of humanity itself, battered and bruised but unyielding, and now it was time to show the galaxy just how dangerous they could be when pushed too far. "On my mark," Alia said, her eyes narrowing as the Zorkesh fleet closed in mark. The quantum cannon unleashed its fury once more. The second blast rocketed through the void, striking another Zorkesh ship in the heart. The alien warship cracked apart its shield systems, no match for the power of humanity's weapon. The crew watched as the second ship was torn asunder, and once again the laughter of the Zorkesh fell silent. The second Zorkesh warship exploded in a flash of light, its fragments scattered across space like a shattered mirror. The shockwave from the blast reverberated through the Vanguard's hull, a momentary tremor reminding the crew that they were fighting something far greater than themselves. Yet the victory brought no relief, only more resolve. The remaining Zorkesh ships hesitated, their commanders uncertain. For the first time, they had believed the humans to be insignificant, easy prey. But the Vanguard had shattered that illusion in an instant. Their ships now regrouped, forming a tighter formation around the Vanguard, a wall of weapons and shields that no human vessel could hope to break through. But Alia wasn't concerned. They were underestimating the one thing the Zorkesh didn't understand about humanity: the ability to adapt, to turn even the most hopeless situations into triumphs. "Captain, the Zorkesh are trying to box us in," Lieutenant Harris said, his voice tinged with urgency as he watched the fleet's movements. "They're using their advanced technology to track our evasive maneuvers and force us into a corner." Alia didn't flinch. She'd been in worse situations than this and come out on top. The Zorkesh were predictable in their arrogance. They thought brute force would win the day, but humanity had always fought smarter than that. They didn't need the most powerful ships. They needed the right strategy, and they had it. "Initiate evasive protocols Beta 6, Alia ordered, her voice firm, as she adjusted the Vanguard's course, "and prepare to fire quantum cannon again when the target presents itself." "Understood, Captain," Ensign Ravis responded without hesitation, the crew moving like clockwork as they executed the evasive maneuvers designed to take advantage of the ship's surprising agility. The Vanguard spun sharply, dodging incoming fire and narrowly avoiding missile strikes as the Zorkesh fleet closed in on all sides. They were fast, their weapons were precise, and yet they couldn't seem to land a single blow on the Vanguard. They were beginning to panic, their tactics shifting to desperation. The Zorkesh were still too confident. They believed that no ship could escape their firepower. They believed that no ship could outfight them in a head-on battle. But Alia knew the truth. The Zorkesh had never faced a foe that was willing to sacrifice everything to win, and she would use that to her advantage. "Ready on quantum cannon," Lieutenant Harris called from his station, his fingers moving over the controls as the energy level surged through the ship's systems. "We're almost there, Captain." "Good," Alia nodded. "Give them a taste of their own medicine." Without warning, the Vanguard spun to the side, dodging another Zorkesh barrage. As it slid into position behind the closest enemy ship, the alien vessel was so focused on its pursuit of the Vanguard that it didn't see the trap until it was too late. "Now," Alia barked. The quantum cannon fired again, its energy so powerful it distorted the fabric of space itself. The beam ripped through the Zorkesh ship's shields and tore into its core. The warship disintegrated in an instant. The crew of the Vanguard watched as the enemy ship vanished in a brilliant explosion, leaving only the void of space in its place. For a moment, the bridge was silent save for the hum of the ship's systems and the soft breathing of the crew. They had done it again. They had struck at the heart of the Zorkesh fleet, and the result was the same as before. The once proud warships now lay in ruin, scattered across the stars. "We've got them on the run," Lieutenant Harris said, a note of awe in his voice. "They're retreating." Alia allowed herself a brief smile. But she didn't let up her focus. The fight was far from over, and she knew the Zorkish would not retreat easily. They would come back harder and more determined than before, but humanity had already proven that they could stand their ground, and this battle was far from over. The Zorkish fleet was reeling, their once unshakable confidence shattered in the wake of their two most powerful warships being obliterated by the humans' mysterious weapon. The Vanguard had delivered blow after devastating blow, but Alia knew this was far from over. The retreat was just a temporary strategy, not a surrender. The Zorkish commanders would regroup, recalibrate, and come back with renewed fury. They always did. But Alia had a plan, one that would give humanity a fighting chance to finish what they started. "Captain," Lieutenant Harris's voice broke through her thoughts, his tone a mixture of awe and caution. "They're retreating to the outer edge of the system. I think they're gathering reinforcements." Alia's eyes narrowed. Reinforcements? Of course. The Zorkish never fought fair. They wouldn't stop until they had overwhelming numbers once again, and humanity's lone ship wouldn't be able to withstand a fleet of that size. "How long until they're back in full force?" she asked, her voice calm, but with an underlying urgency. "At least 20 minutes, Harris replied, his fingers tapping on the console. "They're repositioning, but they'll be ready soon." Alia quickly ran the numbers in her mind. 20 minutes, enough time for the crew to catch their breath, but not enough time to relax. The Vanguard had taken a beating, but it was still standing. It had survived thanks to the skill of the crew and the power of the quantum cannon. However, Alia knew that every shot fired from the weapon drained the ship's energy reserves. They couldn't keep this up indefinitely. They needed another advantage. "Ensign Rivas, what's the status on our stealth systems?" Alia asked, her voice sharp. "We can activate the cloaking field, Captain," Rivas replied, her fingers dancing over her station's controls. "But it'll only last for 5 minutes at full power. After that, the system will overheat." "Activate it," Alia ordered without hesitation. "We're going to give them a little surprise." The bridge fell silent as the stealth system hummed to life, a barely perceptible ripple of energy surrounding the Vanguard. On the monitors, the massive Zorkish fleet continued to regroup, unaware that the humans were mere moments away from unleashing another devastating strike. "We've got 5 minutes," Alia said, turning to her crew. "Let's make it count." As the Vanguard faded into invisibility, the crew worked with precision, preparing the quantum cannon for another shot. The Zorkish were focused on the Vanguard's last known position, calculating their next move, unaware that the humans had slipped away into the darkness of space. The clock was ticking, and Alia's heart raced in time with it. This was it. This was their chance. Alia watched as the Zorkish fleet began to split into smaller groups, no doubt preparing for another barrage. They were being strategic, trying to catch the Vanguard in a crossfire, but they had no idea what they were about to face. "Target locked," Lieutenant Harris said, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "Quantum cannon is fully charged. Ready when you are, Captain." Alia's fingers hovered over the controls. The tension in the air was palpable. Her heart pounded, and for a moment she allowed herself to think about what was at stake. Humanity had been on the edge of extinction before, but this time they had come to reclaim their place in the stars. She slammed her hand down on the console, activating the quantum cannon one more time. A bright flash of energy surged from the Vanguard, lighting up the darkness of space. The blast tore through the nearest Zorkish ship, cutting it in half before it even had a chance to react. A brilliant explosion filled the void as the flagship of the Zorkish fleet was reduced to nothing more than debris. "Target destroyed," Lieutenant Harris reported, his voice filled with awe and disbelief. The Zorkish were no longer just fighting for victory. They were fighting to survive. The flash of the quantum cannon's blast still lingered in the void, an afterimage of destruction that echoed through the bridge. The crew of the Vanguard stood motionless for a heartbeat, eyes fixed on the black expanse, waiting for the Zorkesh to react. Alia knew they had struck a critical blow, but the battle was far from over. She could feel the Zorkesh commanders rallying. The silence before the storm. This was when they would show their true strength, their overwhelming power. "Captain." Lieutenant Harris's voice broke through the tension, steady but edged with concern. "The Zorkesh flagship has been destroyed, but they're not retreating. They're coming for us." Alia finished, her voice cold and determined. "I know." On the screen, the remnants of the Zorkesh fleet were rearranging themselves, forming a new strategy with military precision. Alia could see it. There was no longer the chaos of uncertainty in their movements. No more panic. The Zorkesh were regrouping, adapting, and they were coming for the vanguard with a fury that would rival any force in the galaxy. Ensign Revis's hands flew over her controls, monitoring the enemy fleet's movements. "Captain, they're bringing in reinforcements, more warships, and some kind of heavy artillery ships. It looks like they're preparing for a direct assault." Alia took a deep breath, her mind racing. The cloaking field was already offline, and the vanguard was fully exposed. The enemy had figured out their tactics. The Zorkesh were no longer underestimating humanity. They were taking the fight seriously now, and that meant no more surprises. The vanguard was on its own. She had to think fast, because every second they waited meant a stronger enemy, a more lethal assault. "Lieutenant Harris, how long until the quantum cannon is recharged?" Alia asked, her eyes never leaving the monitor as she watched the Zorkesh fleet close in. "Another 5 minutes," Harris replied, his tone tight. "We're pushing the systems to their limits, Captain. We might not have that long before we're overwhelmed." Alia nodded, her thoughts already racing ahead. They needed to make those 5 minutes count, to buy enough time to land the final blow. She turned to the crew, her voice steady as she issued her orders. "Divert all remaining power to the shields and engines. We need to stay mobile. No more waiting. Keep them guessing. And someone get me a targeting solution on their heavy artillery ships. We'll need to take those down first." The crew responded without hesitation, each of them moving with practiced speed. The vanguard lurched as the power distribution shifted, engines humming to life with a new surge of energy. The Zorkesh fleet wasn't just pursuing them. They were forming a deadly perimeter, closing in from all sides. Alia watched as the gap between the vanguard and the approaching warships narrowed, the distance shrinking faster than she'd like. "Targeting solution ready, Captain," Ensign Revis reported, locking onto their artillery ships. "Fire," Alia commanded, her voice sharp. The vanguard's weapon systems flared to life as the targeting lasers painted the enemy ships with deadly precision. Missiles rocketed toward the nearest artillery ship, tearing through its shields before slamming into its core. A tremendous explosion rocked the space around the ship as it disintegrated in an instant. But even as one of their enemies fell, more appeared, their reinforcements swelling the ranks of the Zorkesh fleet. "Another artillery ship incoming," Rivas warned, her voice trained as she tracked the new threat. Alia's heart pounded in her chest, but her mind was calm. This wasn't the first time humanity had been on the edge of defeat. They had learned how to fight back, how to survive. The Zorkesh thought they could dominate this galaxy, but they hadn't counted on the one thing that had always driven humanity forward: their will to win. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers," Alia barked. "Keep them off balance." The vanguard danced between the incoming fire, its engines roaring as it outmaneuvered the Zorkesh warships with a grace they didn't expect from an old rust bucket. The crew moved like a well-oiled machine. Every shot counted, every turn precise. The vanguard was in motion, fighting not just for survival, but for the future of humanity. The vanguard's hull groaned under the pressure as the crew fought to keep the ship in motion, darting and weaving between incoming fire. The Zorkesh were relentless, their heavy artillery ships and reinforcements closing in with terrifying precision. Alia could see it on the display. More enemy ships had emerged from the shadow of the outer planets, their sleek bodies cutting through the void like predators scenting blood. This wasn't just a battle anymore. It was a war for survival. "Captain, the shields are weakening," Lieutenant Harris said, his voice strained. "We can't keep taking this much fire." The hull's starting to buckle. Alia felt a cold shiver run down her spine. The ship was old, patched together after decades of service, and every hit they took left a scar. The Zorkesh were closing in on them, their tactics more coordinated now than ever before. If they didn't do something soon, the Vanguard wouldn't survive another barrage. "How long until we can fire the quantum cannon again?" Alia asked, already knowing the answer but needing to hear it anyway. 2 minutes, Harris replied, his fingers flying over the controls. "But we can't keep it charged much longer. The core's getting unstable." Alia's mind raced. They couldn't afford to wait another 2 minutes. If the Zorkesh locked onto them with their full force, there would be no escape. She had one chance left, and she had to make it count. "Ensign Rivas, get me a firing solution on their flagship," Alia commanded, her voice tight with urgency. "We're going after their command ship. If we take it out, the rest of their fleet will scatter." Rivas didn't hesitate, her fingers flying over the controls as she locked onto the flagship. "Locked on, Captain, but it's heavily shielded. The quantum cannon might not be enough." "We'll make it enough," Alia said, her eyes hardening. "When it's time, fire everything we have. Don't hold back." The Zorkesh fleet tightened its formation, their ships closing in on all sides. The space between the Vanguard and the enemy fleet was shrinking rapidly. Every moment they waited felt like an eternity. Alia knew the crew was reaching their breaking point, their bodies and minds trained from hours of constant combat. But they had no choice. They had to keep fighting. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers," Alia ordered. "We can't let them pin us down. Move when I say, left, then right, then hard to port. Keep them guessing." The crew reacted immediately, their coordination flawless, as the Vanguard danced between incoming fire, narrowly dodging energy blasts and missiles that zipped past the ship like deadly raindrops. Alia's heart raced as she focused on the flagship, the massive Zorkesh vessel looming like a shadow over the battlefield. This was it, the turning point. If they could destroy the flagship, the rest of the Zorkesh fleet would lose its cohesion and be vulnerable to the Vanguard's strikes. "Quantum cannon, ready?" Alia asked, barely able to suppress the tension in her voice. "Ready, Captain," Harris confirmed, his eyes glued to the power readings. "But the charge time is getting longer. We need to fire now." Alia didn't wait. Fire. The Vanguard's quantum cannon erupted with a burst of energy so bright it could have lit the stars. The beam shot forward, cutting through the void, leaving a trail of raw power in its wake. It slammed into the Zorkesh flagship with a force that shook the Vanguard's very foundations. For a moment, the universe stood still. The flagship's shields cracked under the intensity of the blast, and then the ship exploded in a cataclysmic burst, sending debris scattering in every direction. "Target destroyed," Harris reported, his voice a mix of awe and disbelief. The remaining Zorkesh ships faltered, their coordination unraveling as their leadership vanished in the blink of an eye. The battlefield was suddenly quieter, the enemy fleet's once organized movements now reduced to disarray. Alia's breath caught in her throat as she watched the effects unfold. The Zorkesh were no longer a unified force. They were scattered, vulnerable. But she knew this victory was just the beginning. The fight was not over. Not yet. The explosion of the Zorkesh flagship lit up the expanse, a brilliant flash that illuminated the darkness of space. For a moment, the Zorkesh fleet seemed to falter, their ships pulling back in confusion and disarray. It was a small victory, but a crucial one. The Vanguard had made its mark, and Alia could see it in the scattered movements of the enemy ships. Without their leader, they were lost. The fight wasn't over, but the tide had shifted in humanity's favor. "Captain," Lieutenant Harris said, his voice filled with cautious optimism. "The Zorkesh are breaking off. They're pulling back, forming a retreat." Alia allowed herself a brief, shallow breath. They had done it. The Zorkesh had underestimated humanity's will to fight. And now, after days of combat, the result was clear. The vanguard had held its ground, proving that even the most outgunned species could stand tall if they fought smart. "Ensign Rivas," Alia commanded, her gaze still locked on the display, watching the Zorkesh fleet split apart. "Are they retreating in full force?" "Yes, Captain," Rivas replied, her fingers tapping over the controls. "It looks like they're trying to regroup at the edge of the system. They're fleeing, but they're not done. They'll likely try to salvage what's left and come back for another attack." "Not if we can help it," Alia said with a steel edge to her voice. "Set course for their remaining fleet. We're not letting them off this easy." Alia's crew worked quickly, their movements synchronized, each one focused on their task. They had come this far, and they weren't about to let the Zorkesh slip away only to return stronger. The quantum cannon was charging again, its energy building with each passing second, and the remaining Zorkesh ships were growing closer. "Prepare for another strike," Alia ordered. "This time, we'll finish what we started." As the vanguard sped toward the retreating fleet, Alia's mind raced. She had seen the destruction of the Zorkesh flagship, the devastation they had wrought, and the desperation in their eyes when they realized they were facing the human force far beyond what they could have imagined. But even now, Alia could feel the pressure mounting. The vanguard was running on fumes, and they didn't have the luxury of waiting for another reprieve. "Lock onto their remaining ships," Alia said, her voice sharp with command. "I want everything we've got. Every weapon, every last ounce of power we can muster." "Locked on, Captain," Rivas said, her tone firm. "Targeting their command ships. It's going to be a direct hit." Alia's breath held as she watched the countdown tick down on the screen. The Zorkesh ships were disorganized, but they were still formidable. One well-placed strike could turn the tide against them. "Fire." Alia's command was immediate, and the quantum cannon fired once more, its energy tearing through space in a brilliant flash. The blast struck the closest Zorkesh command ship with a force that shattered its shields and ripped through its structure. The ship's core imploded in a violent explosion, leaving only debris floating in the vacuum. "Target destroyed," Harris confirmed, his voice full of relief. "The rest of their fleet is retreating. They're scattering." "We did it, Captain." Alia leaned back in her seat, the weight of the battle finally lifting from her shoulders. The Zorkesh were retreating, their forces in disarray. The vanguard had won. Humanity had won. "Set course for the nearest safe zone," Alia said, her voice quieter now, more composed. "We need to regroup and prepare for whatever comes next." The bridge was filled with the quiet hum of the ship's systems, and the crew exchanged looks of relief and exhaustion. They had fought together, against impossible odds, and now they had won. But Alia knew this was just the beginning. The war for humanity's survival had only just begun. As the vanguard sailed away from the battlefield, Alia looked out at the stars, her heart filled with a quiet pride. The Zorkesh might have underestimated them, but humanity had shown them that even the oldest, most battered ships could be the most dangerous of all.